Will Taylor Swift get pregnant this year? Is the Earth flat? Will the U.S. go to war? These are all questions you can bet on Polymarket, which, alongside its competitor Kalshi, seems to be worming its way into every crevice of life and the brands that make it possible. And I'm wondering, what does that mean for both people and brands involved? Welcome to Marketing Brew Weekly. I'm Jenny Mai Wynn, reporter at Marketing Brew.
I'm Kelsey Sutton, editor.
And I'm Katie Hicks, senior reporter. Let's get into it. Before we get into predictions, I know one sure thing, which is that this May, we're diving into social and creator marketing, covering what's driving real ROI in the creator economy right now. So if you're in NYC, we'd love to see you and meet you in person. For more information, check out our events page at marketingbrew.com/events, and you'll find more info in the show notes.
Woohoo! We'd love to see people in person, so hopefully that happens.
I bet I will see both of you there. The puns, the jokes, the references are going to continue. But before I see you there, let's talk about prediction marketing. Who could have predicted this?
Everyone.
Ultimately is my first question.
Everybody, including us. Are you guys betting on Kalshi or Polymarket?
I can't call myself a betting girl or a prediction markets girl. Different, very different, apparently. But it's everywhere, even though I am not personally betting on it. So
yes, I think it's like becoming very hard to escape. And if you have any inkling of being a betting person, even if it's just kind of in your personal life, I bet I'm going to see this later. There's an option to do it and possibly make some money on it or lose some money on it.
Yeah. Could go either way. I mean, the reason I started paying attention to it personally is that I love an award show. I was watching the Golden Globes earlier this year that kicked it off, and the Globes had a very prominent partnership with Polymarket, put the odds on screen, lots of discourse. We will hash out all those details throughout the rest of this episode, but it forced its way into my world, even though I had personally no interest in it. And I think that's just kind of the moment that we're in right now with prediction markets. Where have you guys seen it? I will kick us off before I kick it over to you guys, because I was at South by, we did an episode on it, and that's where I saw Polymarket show up in person. And I think that was pretty crazy. It wasn't something I was expecting. It was rolled into another brand activation. It was Alex Cooper's Unwell activation, and Polymarket just had a little booth. And they were, at the time, having people guess who was going to win Best Picture at the Oscars and trying to get the girlies involved, I think, in Polymarket, the betting mania of it all. But it's in places that you wouldn't expect and all the places that you would expect. Any other places you guys think are of note?
I think I mentioned this in our sports betting episode, but there's a big billboard right by my apartment that says, "Will Timothée Chalamet win Best Actor this year?" I'm like, you got to take that down.
It's still
no, he didn't.
But somebody lost a lot of money on
Yeah,
that.
I'm pretty sure it was a Polymarket ad, but I'm like, you got to take it down by now, please. But yeah, besides the big billboard, obviously the Golden Globes, also CNN, the Kalshi predictions ticker that's at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, I feel like that's where I've seen it the most. CNN, CNBC. I believe that there are some negotiations with Fox News and Fox Weather for it to show up there. So I feel like it's kind of infiltrating these places where it's almost like used as an extra data point to kind of maybe help an audience, like a viewer, kind of try to make sense of like the odds of something, which I think is so funny, because I'm like, these platforms are not like, it's not like a poll. It's not like it's
asking like official sources.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It is a group of self-selected people who are trying to make money on something. And of course the executives who are involved in these companies are saying, well, it is because there's nothing more valuable or more you're incentivized to be accurate because you make money off of it. But I think
there's also a herd mentality to it too, right? Like if you see 60% of people are betting one way, you might bet that way too, and then all of a sudden it goes up to 70%, 80%, whatever. It's doesn't necessarily mean everyone's right, but everyone might just be riding the same train.
It doesn't make it more likely that a hurricane is going to hit at 8:02 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like in the Fox Weather example, which I don't think that deal has been signed yet. But it's it doesn't actually make that more likely to happen. It just makes it more. It's more people think that's going to happen, right? And it's that doesn't actually necessarily change the outcome. It just I don't know. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it's something that is worth paying attention to for sure. So I actually talked to a professor at Columbia Business School, Olivier Tubia. He's a professor of marketing there, and he kind of walked me through what's going on with these particular prediction market brands. And he mentioned kind of the idea that like it can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, yes, like you're seeing people bet this way, so you kind of like jump in on it too. But I'm curious, like for me, it's showing up in entertainment world, right? At the Globes, I think news media shouldn't be entertainment, but some people feel that it is or interact with it in that way. And I'm kind of curious, like why they're pushing into this industry in particular. And the short answer is that it is a brand building exercise for both Polymarket and Kalshi and the media brands that are partnering with them, which is very fascinating. What brand impact do you guys think there is when you see Polymarket on like the Globes broadcast, for example? What's the impression that you get from that?
I feel like it's borrowing the legitimacy of the Globes, right? Like in that case, or in the news instances as well, it's saying Polymarket, Kalshi, maybe you haven't heard of them before, but you certainly will now because the Globes is obviously a huge moment. People watch lots of news programming. So it's also kind of borrowing the legitimacy of whatever organization that Kalshi and Polymarket have kind of are partnering with or working with in these deals and these arrangements. It's kind of saying, well, like CNN, like that's a trusted news source for people. And it's like, okay, so now Kalshi and Polymarket gets that halo effect from that. Or the same with the Globes. Like the Globes is an established brand, and whatever feelings people have about that brand, it's the same thing of any brand that's ever partnered with these things is saying, or these organizations, you get the power of that brand that you're associating with. Mm-hmm. And I just think in this moment, though, it's really interesting because Polymarket and Kalshi are not brands without risk or sort of scrutiny in some ways, like as they're building, as they're trying to legitimize themselves, and become very, very mainstream brands and get lots of people using these platforms. The brands that are established, that have a brand reputation working with them, I think that there's a risk of, like as those brands build, there's also some controversy. People are saying, what are these platforms? What are they doing? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the real incentive here? Like, should they be regulated differently? And all of that, I think, threatens to kind of trickle onto the other brands that are partnering with them. And so I think it's a really kind of tricky question that some of these brands are grappling with if they're kind of saying, do we entertain this? I don't know. What do you think, Katie?
I get the sense that they're thinking of it as an engagement play, because if you're getting people, like if you're the Globes and you want people to tune in and you want them to like stay tuned in, you want them to invest, if not just like interest, then money. And they stay tuned in to see if their prediction's going to happen. They want to know who's going to win which award because they've invested in it.
Yeah. It's quite literally putting your money where your mouth is.
Right. And honestly, same for the news outlets too, right? It's like, I want to find out what happens because, again, the incentivization is, and maybe you have money on the line.
Yeah.
And when your main metric is viewership, you want those numbers to be high.
Yeah. Olivier, the professor I spoke to, had an interesting idea that it kind of also turns the experience of live TV into almost a social media-like experience because you have a live engagement element with it. If you've placed a bet on it, you're tuning in to see if it's happening. You're talking to people about your bets. You can be like DMing and messaging on the side on different platforms, but it turns TV from just like a static, like you watching your screen experience to then like you're interacting with more people around it, which changes like kind of the branding of a live TV experience, right? It's not just sitting in your living room. It's like you're talking to people, you are getting in on it on a different way. And yeah, it's engagement at the end of the day.
And I feel like we've already seen this in the sports world with sports betting brands, like really making like sports is not just watching and seeing who wins. It's like people have money on every moment of that game. Is somebody going to run across the field at halftime? Is somebody going to drop the ball at the 10-yard line? Or whatever running, I'm talking football here, but like there's so much that it just changes the way that a consumer kind of engages with the content. And again, like so many brands, it's not just Polymarket and Kalshi, and it's not just the media brands that are broadcasting this programming. So many brands want that engagement. They want that interactivity. They want people kind of coming back and back and back to find out what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just a really interesting, like strategic shift, but it really just changes the game in so many ways.
Yeah. I want to go back to that risk element that you mentioned, because I think there's two tweets that I think really demonstrate what you were saying. So with the Globes example, when the Globes partnership happened, the Polymarket odds actually correctly predicted 26 of 28 total categories. And Shane Copland, Polymarket CEO, tweeted that it was the single most mainstream prediction market integration to date. He did also acknowledge that we have a long way to go to educate the public on the value of market-based forecasts. So I think he knows that like there's some tension there. There's some people who like do not enjoy this on their Globes broadcasts. And that is demonstrated by the tweet from Josh Billinson at Semaphore, who just saw this Globes moment and said, the Golden Globes Best Podcast odds presented by Polymarket is a new low for this humiliating award show. So I think that speaks what you were saying, Kelsey. It's like, okay, like you got the engagement out of it, but now you have people being like, really, Golden Globes, you did this, like you partnered with Polymarket. I think it also created like a spoiler like effect for the categories themselves. So yeah, could be good, could be bad, depending on what camp you fall in.
Yeah.
The terminology of like market-based predictions is so interesting to me too, because I feel like they're trying to position themselves as like a scientific data base kind of like, you know, factual, very like verified source. And it's like, it's really just based on like how many people are putting money on one thing versus another. It's not about like, again, talking to experts, talking to like, you know, doing analysis of like a bunch of news stories, things like that. It's really just where are people putting their money.
I mean, they're literally calling themselves like a news 2.0. And I think that's an important piece of their own marketing that they are putting out, like the messaging around their own brands is kind of positioning Polymarket and Kalshi as like a source of news and accuracy and like a new way to engage with the news. But as you said, it's not actually reporting anything. It's just what the masses of people are paying attention to and betting on. But it's kind of how they are getting people to engage as like, oh, if you don't want to watch the news, you can just watch the Polymarket or Kalshi odds, and that's going to be accurate in itself. But I think it's important to note that it's not always accurate. It's actually often not accurate. The New York Times looked at the social media posts from Polymarket across all of their accounts, and they often post misleading information that may or may not lead someone into betting a certain way, getting a certain payout, but they present it as if it is fact and as if it is a news-like source.
It's often just like one sentence, like a newswire. It looks a lot like the AP. It looks a lot like they're just like reporting out something very simplistic that's like verified. And yeah, to your point, it's not usually the case. It's just kind of something that people are betting on.
Yeah, which works for their brand, but is stressful for humanity, I think.
I think this is so interesting because I think that these brands are trying to build themselves as something other than, like, if we distill it down, it is people are betting on stuff. It's like a betting platform. And again, it's not regulated like a betting, and like it's not regulated like gambling, and there's that could be a whole other episode that we will not, that's not why we're doing this episode. But I think that because of that, like these brands have to kind of sell themselves as something else, like some other value. And the value here, I think, is like there's a truth value. Like you can find out what people think is going to happen, and that's really accurate and aggregate, and that's like a value. But I want to talk about this. I think that's just such an interesting thing that we're kind of seeing from these two brands in particular. But Katie, you recently wrote about they're also kind of looking to kind of lean into that value. They did some free grocery store pop-ups. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you know way more about it than I do.
In February, Kalshi did like a 3-hour, we'll give you $50 if you line up and come to West Side Market in Manhattan, and you can get $50 worth of groceries as long as you wait in the line, you get in. In response to that, Polymarket then said, well, we're going to one-up you, and we're going to host a like multi-day event downtown where people could like get a tote bag and then go into this market that they had created and get as many groceries as they could possibly fill in that bag. All of it was framed as philanthropy, but I talked to some experts who were really concerned about kind of the message this was sending and who they were targeting, because ultimately the people who show up to get free groceries tend to be the people who need the most financial assistance, and those shouldn't necessarily be the people who are on prediction markets.
They might have a lot to lose, the most to lose.
Yeah, and that's kind of the gist. There were some articles, I think Curbed went there, Forbes went, and they talked to people who were in line, and they were saying that like, I'd never heard of these platforms before. I just, it was appealing to me to get free food. I need free food.
I think that's something that's really interesting that happens at, I imagine pop-ups in general, but interesting that you said it with that one. And then when I was at the one at South by, like people don't know what these brands are when they are at the pop-ups. And obviously they're doing that to get that brand awareness out there. But there's something to chew on with them potentially like being in the gambling world that people don't know what they're really signing up for when they're like, oh, I just want free groceries. Oh, I just wanted to go to the Unwell Alex Cooper event and like talk about movies. But if you happen to get people in the right mindset, they might actually really want to be on Polymarket and Kalshi, which is great for those brands. But is that like the best way for those people to kind of like engage with those brands? There's like, I feel like there should be a sense of like corporate responsibility there, but I don't get the sense that Polymarket and Kalshi are necessarily putting that high at the top of their priorities list at this point.
I think it's all just a way to appeal to a new audience, because with the sports betting, like a lot of people are already familiar with both platforms. So then you think about like who's watching the Oscars, like probably more women, maybe less people, or like, you know, you think about like the broadcast TV element with CNN. Maybe an older generation is now learning what Polymarket or Kalshi is. Like they're really trying to reach every single person, but the question remains like, should every single person, maybe those, especially those who don't have disposable income, be aware and be using these platforms?
I will say that the professor I spoke to did point out that it does create a very interesting pool of data because so many people are on it and these are real-time reactions, and like it, yes, creates the self-fulfilling prophecy, but there is something to be studied or to be looked at more with all of this like real-time data coming in of what people think is going to happen in sports, in pop culture, in politics, which is actually where a lot of these platforms started, which is stressful, but I guess it makes sense at the same time. So the more people use it, the more interesting it becomes, which is a weird kind of loop that we found ourselves in. And I think
the more people use it, the more legitimate it seems.
Yes.
And that makes it like, I feel like it's almost a race against the clock. It's like, how fast can these platforms grow before any sort of regulatory changes maybe catch up to it? And maybe at that point, it's so big and it's so widely used, and it's, you know, that there are, you know, there's a lot of
fail, basically.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think that's just a really interesting thing. But the bigger it gets, the more that another brand might say, you know what, I want to work with them because that makes my brand look cutting edge or new, or it's a new way to engage with consumers. And so there's just a really interesting kind of calculus, I think, because there are so many brands who say, I want to seem new, I want to be doing something
culturally with
it,
Yeah.
and I want to seem, you know, like up to date. And again, that engagement, that interactivity, so many brands are seeking out different ways to do that. So I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we see like a brand, like, do they set up something where you're betting on the color that somebody's wearing in an ad or something like that? Like we already saw this with Super Bowl ads, right? Like there's, you know, it's finding ways to get people to engage with ads differently. And I think that these betting platform or these prediction markets platforms are ways to do that. And I imagine there are brands that are kind of scratching their heads going, is this the right moment? Do we do it through this, or do we do it through an old-fashioned sweepstakes, or I don't know.
Yeah, if you see, because I know this happened during the Super Bowl, people are betting on like whether Serena was going to show up in the Roe ads, or like, you know, if certain celebrity spokespeople were going to show up, like, will Ben Affleck return for Duncan, things like that. And it's like, if you're Duncan or if you're Roe, like, do you engage with that, or do you just kind of pretend you don't? I do not see it. I do not engage.
Yeah, I would be curious to kind of look back at, especially like the Super Bowl. I feel like it's just like a rich area to look at of how maybe some of those brands that did show up in the prediction markets available bets, if they did engage, or if they were like, I feel like, I wonder if you ever like go on a Reddit thread as like a social media manager and you're like talking about your ad, you could totally drum up chatter in like a seemingly organic way that then feeds back into the prediction markets. I think there's a lot of like rather like subtle things that you can do in this area that would be great engagement for both brand and prediction market platform.
And then there's this whole other ethical question, which like, again, I'm like, this is a conversation for another time, but it's like, if you worked on the ad, but it's embargoed and it's not out, like does somebody then go and place a put something on a predictions market, they bet that it's going to look like this because they actually know what it's going to look like. And then, you know, it's like,
or if you're in PR and you're giving it to people like us, like you're giving people like journalists stuff under embargo, like, do you trust like hopefully
Yeah.
we all have journalistic integrity, but like, you're giving information out to the public and just hoping that no one's out there like taking that information and doing something with it.
I don't know. It's like a whole other meta question. Like, do you
Yeah.
have rules for your staff again, like for using these platforms or not? I don't know.
Lots of questions to ponder for sure. But I mean, this isn't slowing down, right? I think like the partnerships in particular are only going to continue in entertainment world or elsewhere. What do you guys think happens next? Like what happens to the brands that do choose to engage with Polymarket, Kalshi, any other brands of the same sort? And like, what if something controversial happens with one of them? What do the brands have to consider in this case?
I think that brands have to consider that arm's length kind of distance, right? Like, if there's, again, if somebody's betting on like who's going to show up in a Dunkin' Super Bowl ad, like, do you keep the plausible deniability distance, or do you grab it by the horns? I don't know. I think that some brands are more willing to kind of engage with that risk and potentially do that. But at the end of the day, if you're a brand like doing something there, you're not just building your own brand. You're building like another platform's brand. And so I think the question is like, how much does it build my brand versus like building another separate platform's brand, and like is that worth the trade-off, particularly because these platforms are a little bit controversial, right? Like, that might not be worth it for some brands, or a brand might say, go big, go home. Let's do something really crazy and we'll see what happens. And like either way, people will be talking about us. Like we're okay with a little bit of controversy.
Yeah, I think we will see some sort of campaign where a brand's like, place a bet on what you think our next spokesperson is going to be, or like what our next flavor is going to be. But I think to your point, like I think you have to really consider like, is this the right thing to do, especially considering your audience? Like if you're a candy brand and you're like, are we going to release a caramel flavor or not? Like if you've got a lot of kids in your audience base, like you shouldn't be working with a a predictions market.
Very different, as
Very
we
different.
have mentioned. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about because like you should, at the end of the day as a business, like care about your customers, and like there are things here to consider of like true like ethical concern, like a gambling addiction, things like that. But at the end of the day, it will have business impact on you as well if you don't think about these things far in advance. Like if the prediction market brands themselves find themselves in controversy, if the way that you work with them is a controversial thing that ends up happening, it will not only affect like the well-being of your customer base, but you are not going to reap the brand benefits that hopefully you were thinking you were going to get out of it. So kind of important to think about from the beginning, which is the case with any partnership, but I just feel like it feels especially more volatile with these particular brands.
Especially since some states are like pursuing legal action to try to classify these platforms as gambling platforms. I think, knowing that there's the chance that these could get shut down in those states. Like if your audience is in those states, I think there's Arizona, Illinois, and Connecticut right now are like in the midst of some lawsuits to defend these laws. But yeah, I mean, if you're trying to target people in those areas, and who knows, it might catch like fire and more states might follow suit. Like you have to think about, is it worth investing in a partnership if it could get shut down at any minute?
Yeah. Also, I think customers can get frustrated with the platforms themselves. This is a crazy example, but there was a very big hoopla around the Venezuelan invasion, and there was a big bet that was placed on that. It was supposed to be a $400,000 payout, but in the fine print, I can't remember if it was Polymarket or Kalshi, but the platform was like, oh no, we don't allow this type of betting. So people were also upset with the platform itself. So I think when you get into bed with a brand that can kind of just like Uno reverse and be like, actually, we aren't going to pay this out, those customers will be upset as well. And then you get that bleed over if you're partnering with them. Obviously, you wouldn't be partnering on such a crazy prediction as that, but still, I think there's some potential impact there.
It's just the risk of playing in a legal gray area.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like you would hate for like somebody not to get the payout because like Grimace was orange and like it's like a fine print sort of thing.
Yeah.
In some like random like sort of thing. Like you just don't want that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're not betting girls, but if you guys were betting people, what would you bet is coming next in Polymarket partners, Kalshi partners, things to pay attention to in this area?
I think this is, I would bet that in 5 years, this is not like something we'll be talking about.
Ooh,
I think
spicy.
That might be wrong,
Yeah.
but I feel like it's got a short runway. I think it's going to burn bright and burn fast.
I'm feeling the same way.
All right.
But I am curious to see what people are able to do with the platforms in the meantime.
Yeah. All right. I think you guys should put your money where your mouth is. Get on those platforms. But
I don't know about that.
bet that it's not going to be here in 5 years. I think that would be really interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have thoughts about Polymarket, Kalshi, other prediction market brand stuff, send us an email at mkbw@morningbrew.com, which you can also find in the show notes. And we'll catch you next week.